All right, I'm back. So I'm going to take you through the tools of actually how to approach and do this. Once again, I'm going to use Photoshop for this, but let me talk through a couple of resources first. The first big one I'm going to point out is the Spriters resource. So this is a great website where people have posted sprites that they've ripped from games. Now, these are not for you to take and use on your own projects. These are licensed and owned by somebody else. Do not use them for that. But for educational purposes, this is a great website you can go to, and you can look things up by system and by game, and you can start finding all sorts of sprite sheets that you can then dissect. You can start looking at the resolution, the colors, the approach. And so this is a good resource to start trying to find all this stuff and figure out how to make it on your own. As part of that, I wanted to point out, the last video I was focusing mainly on characters, but the same thing is true for environments, backgrounds, things like props, stuff like that. You can go through each of those and dissect them as well. If you're not familiar with how these types of games were made, I want to explain that a little bit right now too. For things like the backgrounds, they were not built as lush finished levels like this. They were built out of tiles that are then repeated. So think of it as like Legos or building blocks for creating your 2D art. Once more, this is about limited space in the games, and so they had to find ways of creating this stuff without it filling up, all the memory. And so the way they would do it would be actually with these types of tiles that they would plan out, build the tiles, and then they would start placing the tiles. So anytime it seems like there's a transition, well, they had a tile for that. And so there are a lot of tools that are going to be built around being able to do this. And with some of the game engines nowadays as well, if you're trying to go for that retro look, they actually come with tile mapping built in. So a good example is Unity, which is a game engine that I use fairly frequently. And they have tile maps built in. So I can create my own tiles and then use tile maps to place them to create a retro style 2D games in that traditional way. So this is how the environments and the backgrounds would be built. So just something else for you to think about. Now I want to talk a little bit about software that you can use to create sprites. I generally just use Photoshop, but there are occasions where I want to use something that's more customized or built for this application. And I've tried a lot of them, but there are two that I would actually recommend. The first is Sprite. This is great for creating characters and animations. I really enjoy a lot of its functionality to be able to show the drawings as they're going from one to another. So think of it in terms of traditional 2D animations where people would have a pegboard with the animation papers and a light or a light underneath, and so they're able to flip through and see the different animations and how they're interacting with each other, the individual sprites in this case, but in that it would be your individual drawings as part of the animation. And also having a light board to be able to see multiple animations at the same time to kind of see how they relate to each other. Sprite is wonderful for that. I still generally use Photoshop, but this is a good software if you are interested in looking at it. Another one that I like is Pixel Edit. So if you are going to be doing tile-based backgrounds, this is built with that functionality in mind, and it does a really good job. So these are two possible software. There are others. For the example, though, I'm just going to be using Photoshop. So let me transition to that really fast. And I'm going to do it with the full screen so that it's a little bit easier to see. So here is a character that I did for some of my students, as well as this one. These were just examples. There's some things that you're going to notice that are commonalities as I'm creating these. Here's one that I did for Project Leaky Dimensions, and I've also got this one here, the T-Rex, that I've pulled up to use as an example. So when I start to create a character, a lot of times you'll see characters that are in things like sprite sheets, like this, where they're all spread out. that is generally an end product where they've taken the characters and then they've composited them. Many software engines now will composite it for you and create the sheets for you. With older game engines, you would work on the characters, but then lay them out on your own sprite sheets, which can then be compressed down within the game engine. But I generally like to work with a single character on, in a single file that allows me to figure out, okay, this is my exact resolution. This is what I'm working towards. And then I can output those as individual sprites that are then made part of a larger sprite sheet. So to do that, I want to figure out first, what resolution am I working at? That's where being able to find these examples and look at them helps. So this one's 32 pixels tall. So maybe I'm going to do one at 32 by 32. So I'm going to create a new file. So file new. And I will make this 32 by 32. I don't need to worry about the resolution because this isn't for print. I'm working strictly with the pixels. So 32 by 32 pixels. I'll hit OK. And I'll need to zoom in really far because it's actually really tiny. Now, you'll notice that most of these have this pinkish, purplish, Pepto-Bismol color. There's a good reason for this. As I mentioned in the last video, pixels are either on or off. So as part of your color palette, there would be one color that would represent off. It would be your transparency color. A lot of studios had this kind of pinkish purple color simply because it's a color that stands out, makes any other textures that you're painting on, any other pixels that are on here. Like if I put let me find this. Put like a brown pixel, anything other than the pink. I accidentally bumped it. If I put a brown pixel here, I'm going to notice it. Whereas if I didn't have that background there, it might get lost. So if I had a color that was white or closer to white, that was part of the character, and I had some missing pixels, I might miss that. But when I have that pink background, it is very easy to see these and know that they're there so that I can then make sure that they are removed. Okay, so it allows for clarity. It also allows for me to understand what my transparencies are. So I'm using this not in the exact same way that we used to do it, where that would be the color assigned to the transparency, and then it would just automatically be filtered out. Instead, now with the way I do it, I just simply turn that off when I do my final export, so this still acts as my transparency color. Now, the only time this would become a problem was if you were working on a game that had this kind of color. So if you're working on like a Barbie game, you may change what your background transparency color was because, for example, you pick like an olive drab because there's might not be any time where you're using an olive drab type color. But the idea is that regardless of what the color is, you need a color that's going to make things pop, and it's going to act as your transparency color in effect. So I will begin, if I jump to this file, by going Edit, Fill, selecting a color, and bringing it up here, doing like this pinkish purple-ish color, hitting OK, and hitting OK again. And so now I've got that background color. That may actually be popping a little bit too much with red, but you know what? It's fine. Then I will create a new layer, and this is what I'm going to paint on. Now, to do my basic layout, I don't need to worry about too much. I can have this as a partial transparency, and in fact, to do that for me is fine. And I may go, okay, well, what am I making? Let's say I'm going to make some kind of caveman character. And so let me change this color really fast. Get something that'll stick out a little bit. But, maybe a very flat top of his head, big jaw, big broad shoulders, big meat hooks for hands. Make him super muscular, short stubby legs. Maybe a partial beard and nose. Whatever this character happens to be, I'm just laying it out, which is fine. So just like any other type of art, you can get your underdrawings in. If you've got concept art, even better. Then you've got something you're working from as you're trying to make it work to this resolution. You've got a guide for what you're going to build. But I can use this as a guide. But when I actually start laying out my actual character, I need to make sure that I'm using the tools in a specific way. I shouldn't work with any kind of opacity. Once again, pixels are either on or off, so they have to be 100% opacity. If you have any familiarity with Photoshop, you've probably explored the brush tool, at least for painting things. What we're going to be using to create this kind of retro style pixel art is the pencil tool. So if you hold down the left mouse button, or if you've got a stylus, you just hold down on it. Instead of the brush tool here, I'm going to select the pencil tool. I'm going to make sure that that's at 1 pixel. And it's bouncing around. 1 pixel. The mode is normal. The opacity should be 100%. And then I'm going to check the brush settings themselves. And I want to make sure things like shape dynamics, transfer, all of that is turned off. So that way, when I paint, I am literally getting pixel to pixel, full opacity painting. And in that way, I'm going to get this retro style look, where if I have partial transparencies, it's going to look wrong. There's going to be stuff showing through. So I've got this layer 1, that's kind of my guide. Layer 2, I just created this. This is where I can actually build this up. And rather than just coming in with, black and marking it out, which I could just do a full silhouette. Depending on the style or an approach I want to take, I generally will lay out flat colors just to get the basic foundation. So I'm going to point out this T-Rex really fast. The way I started was I had an idea of what I wanted. I did some quick rough sketches. I had some other sketches too. And then I did a quick layout using some of these basic shapes, filled it in with solid color over top. And then I did another version using this as a guide that I then had the flats on, built up the basic shapes, and eventually got to this kind of end product. Once you finish the first version of a character or a background, then you've got your style nailed and locked down. From there, then you can animate it. And at that point, it's similar to other forms of animation where you go through and figure out what all your poses are, you rough them in, and then you try and do the polished version over top and remove the rough underdrawings. But that way you end up with these nicer, clean final projects or final products. Same thing for this kind of a character. You figure out what the motion is, what the position is, what the character is. And so even this, I've got all these things like the upper attack, lower attack, upper block, all that stuff, but it all started with the base. What does the character look like? How am I approaching it? And then once I have those decisions made, then it's much easier to go through and deal with all the animations. All right. Same thing for this. I had my students in a class. I'm like, okay, give me something, anything. And they said, Puss in Boots. And it's like, great. Here's my rough drawing. How am I going to approach this one? I want to really emphasize the boots and all that stuff. So that was the underdrawing, final product. But let me show you how I built that up. Same thing, retro character, underdrawing, final. Okay, so let me jump over here. So with this caveman that I'm trying to create right now, I've got that underdrawing as a foundation. I am going to get a kind of basic skin tone, and I'm following a similar style to something between the example that I was showing for Chrono Trigger and Seiken Densetsu 3, where I want a little bit more of that gradient. I also am going to make a decision. I'm going to add a black outline to this character. The other ones, I didn't have that. This was more like Seiken Densetsu 3, as was this. This one had a little bit more of that Chrono Trigger vibe because of the darker outline and the way I'm approaching some of these things stylistically. So for this one, I'm going to go for this one being a much darker outline, so more of like that Final Fantasy where I've got like almost a perfect black outline. And actually, you know what? I'm going to just kind of go with that style, ish, because this is a bigger, beefier, kind of more squarish character anyway, with more of a flat side view at this point. So I'm going to kind of build it around that style. But even though I know that I'm going to be doing the dark outline, I'm going to start by laying down some of the base colors. So I'm going to get this base skin tone. And anywhere that there's the skin, I'm going to lay that out. The beard I'll keep separate, same as the hair. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just getting the rough shapes laid in, and all of this can be adjusted later. Once again, these big meat hooks. And just quickly fill these in. I don't want to do fills because they tend to feather and leave gradients on the edges. And if I do need to come back and erase something, I want to make sure my eraser has the same settings. So with the eraser, I can set that also to 1 pixel or larger if I need to. I want to make sure that the pencil or the mode is not brush mode, that it is pencil mode, 100% opacity. And under the brush settings for the eraser, same thing. I want all of these things turned off. And that way, if I come back to erase something, it is pixel for pixel. And Control and Command Z is your friend to undo stuff. All right, he's going to be wearing a shirt, going to be wearing pants, and have little tiny shoes. Okay, I'm just making this character up as I go, but this is kind of how I'd block it in. So I want him to have a nice bright white shirt. Actually, I'm going to have a nice bright white shirt here. Kind of tucks in there. I want him to have kind of baggy green pants. I keep going for green. Let me do some bright red, like workout pants. There we go. That'll be fun. Some bright red workout pants. Except I said it was a caveman, didn't I? This is turning into something entirely different. That's okay. This is part of the fun of an exploration process. I said caveman, but now it's... I don't know. I'm almost feeling like a bodybuilder or a sailor type vibe. I apologize. I've gone off track. But that's okay. We'll have fun with this. So bright red pants and some blue sneakers. That sounds like fun. Okay, our caveman has turned into a bodybuilder. That works for me. All right. Get this beard. Just blocking in these colors. That's a little too dark. Let's give him kind of a gingery beard. And same thing with the hair here up top. I'm going to have it kind of scraggly and wild. Give him a mustache right now too. Have this coming off. And at this point, I want to get rid of this background because it's just kind of in the way. It also lets me finally see where I'm missing things or what I might need to do. Okay, that's bringing it in a little bit better. From here, I can actually start building up the character a little bit more and making some decisions. So I've got this character kind of in a place that I like it. As I said before, I want that darker outline. So I'm going to begin with that right here and start coloring in a little bit more of this character. So some areas I'm cutting in, and other areas I'm allowing to remain whole. In this case, I'm going to use that arm as a guideline, and then I'll bring it out further. Let me step this back. I'm just doing sampling really quick as I go to get this cleaner. So I'm doing this very dark outline. And that's going to hide the shoes. So I'm going to have to raise those shoes up a pixel, which is fine. Bringing this in here. I'm also, because of that Final Fantasy approach, I'm going to use it to help define the interior transitions as well. Where with some of the other styles, I would have a little bit more of a gradient. Because of the way this is built out, I'm going to use this to create interior transitions. Not always solid lines, but still something. And then here's this for the arm. I'm not liking that, so I'm actually going to bring that forward a little bit. There we go. That's feeling a little bit better. And maybe something here for the pants. All right, I'm going to bring this blue up a little bit again. There we go. Okay, so this is at least a start to kind of define it. Now I want to start adding some gradients in. If I look back over here at Wow, got it first try. I'm looking at this character and going, okay, well, how exactly am I building that up? This is fairly simplified. I'm working at a slightly higher resolution, but I'm still going for this kind of a look. So I may have any other place where there's transitions, use the black in there, but I'm using some fairly simple colors to define what I'm building. So let me bring this up a little bit more. If I was really going for the Final Fantasy look completely, I would also make this at that lower resolution to have that pixel count. But let's say I'm going for something Final Fantasy-esque in the styling, but at a higher resolution to try and create something kind of unique. Let me darken this a little bit more rather than having it lighter a little bit more. All right. And this may be too far, but this gives me a nice amount. So I'm still not going to go super big on it, where I'm going to have 3 or 4 gradients. I'll probably have just, 2 offset colors and possibly a highlight in there. So in this case, like something like this. I might actually add in this here, and I'll grab a white for the eyes to really make it pop. For this one, I'm going to bring that down. Get this gradient here of where the beard's hitting. And I don't know that I necessarily like this quite so bright white. Get this, sample the black there. There's this character. Maybe where it's tucking in a little bit more. So yeah, that white is a little bit too much for me. I want it to be popping on the eyes more than anything. So I'll just bring this back. So it's still kind of a white shirt, but a little bit less. And then the red pants, drop that down just a touch. And if you really want to get into this, you can get some amazing artwork out of this, even following these styles, where you would still use a lot of the art principles that you may have learned in other places. Getting your, the hot spot from the light, getting your reflected lights and shadows. And you can build up some pretty amazing things using this. All right, and the blue, same thing, drop that down. I'm going to drop that down a bit for the bottom of here. Bring that over to here. Okay. Let me get this beard also. Get a couple of these across here. All right. And same thing, bring in some of the skin tone here a little bit more. All right, and then I want to get just a lighter highlight for the tops of the arms here. And then I want something that's going to just make some of these pop. Because that was another thing with the Final Fantasy, is they had just some of those popping spots. Same thing with the pants, just a little bit across there. All right, so now I have a character in this kind of following some of the Final Fantasy aesthetics, but then with my own little spin on it. And then this is what I can use and output as the start of a character. From here, I can take this initial design and build up movement and animation using the same principles that you would use for any other type of approach to animation. How do you get it to move? How do you get it to function? So now that you have some of these basic tools, remember pixels are either on or off. Look again at stylistically what all of your favorite games did. How did they approach the characters? How did they build it up? And use the tools you have If you don't even have this, if you've just got, you know, like Microsoft Paint, you can do this kind of work. But play around with it, have fun with it, and hopefully you'll be able to come up with some really cool stuff on your own. So go for it, and then look forward to having you watch the next videos as I dive into this a little bit more.